The university bus wheezed to a halt beside a weathered signpost that read, Kigoma Village, population 247. Jama pressed her face against the grimy window, watching elderly villagers scatter like startled birds at their arrival. Her classmates shuffled nervously, clutching their notebooks and cameras, but Jama felt only excitement coursing through her veins. "Listen carefully," Professor Mwangi announced, his voice cutting through the nervous chatter. "We're here to study traditional folklore, not to mock it. The villagers have been gracious enough to share their stories with us." Jama rolled her eyes. At 22, she was the star of the anthropology department, brilliant, beautiful, and utterly contemptuous of what she called primitive superstitions. Her sleek hair caught the afternoon sun as she stepped off the bus, designer boots clicking against the dusty ground. The other students followed her lead, but with considerably less confidence. The village elder, a wizened man named Mzee Hamisi, greeted them with a mixture of respect and wariness. His clouded eyes lingered on Jama's face as if reading something there that troubled him. "You will stay in the old lodge tonight," he said, gesturing toward a colonial-era building that squatted like a wounded animal at the village's edge. "But there are rules you must follow." Jama's friend Na tugged at her sleeve nervously. "Maybe we should listen," she whispered, but Jama shushed her with an imperious wave. Mzee Hamisi's voice grew grave. "When the church bell strikes midnight, you will hear the sound of marching. Colonial soldiers who died here still patrol these grounds. Do not, under any circumstances, open your doors. And tomorrow you must not go near the Black Lake. It is forbidden to all outsiders." The other students nodded solemnly, but Jama barely suppressed a laugh. "Ghostly soldiers? Really?" she muttered to Na. "What's next? Vampires and werewolves." That evening, as they settled into the musty lodge rooms, Jama regaled her classmates with increasingly ridiculous interpretations of the villagers' warnings. "It's probably just the wind," she declared, painting her nails a defiant crimson. "Or maybe they're hiding something valuable near that lake." At 11:47 p.m., the temperature in the lodge plummeted. The students huddled under thin blankets, listening to the wind howl through the gaps in the walls. Then, as the distant church bell began its midnight toll, they heard it. The unmistakable sound of boots marching in perfect formation. Left, right. The footsteps circled the lodge with military precision. "Oh God," Na whispered, her face pale as moonlight. "They're real." The other students cowered in their beds, but Jama stood up, her jaw set with determination. "This is ridiculous," she announced. "There's a perfectly logical explanation." The marching grew louder, closer. Now they could hear the clink of metal, the rustle of uniforms, the whispered commands in a language that sounded like English but somehow wrong, distorted by decades of death. "Jama, don't," Na pleaded, grabbing her friend's arm. But Jama was already at the door, her hand on the rusted handle. "I'm going to prove there's nothing out there," she declared, and with a flourish of theatrical bravado, she yanked the door open. The marching stopped. For a moment there was only silence and the scent of something old and rotting. Then Na screamed, a sound that would haunt the survivors forever. Invisible boots trampled her into the floorboards with sickening efficiency. Her ribs cracked like kindling, her skull caved in with wet precision. Blood pooled around what remained of her body. Jama slammed the door shut, but it was too late. Na was dead, and everyone knew exactly who was to blame. Dawn broke gray and mournful over Kigoma village. Na's body had been removed during the night by silent villagers who exchanged knowing looks, but asked no questions. The surviving students sat in stunned silence, their academic notebooks forgotten, their cameras gathering dust. Professor Mwangi paced the lodge's main room like a caged animal. "We're leaving today," he announced. "This expedition is over." "But Professor," Jama protested, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. "We haven't completed our research." "Research?" He whirled to face her, his eyes blazing with fury and grief. "A girl is dead, Jama. Dead because you couldn't resist playing the skeptic." Jama's cheeks burned, but her pride wouldn't let her back down. "It was an accident. Some kind of mass hallucination brought on by suggestion and fear. Na probably had a heart condition we didn't know about. The other students stared at her in disbelief. Even now, with Na's blood still staining the floorboards, Jama couldn't admit she'd been wrong. "You're sick," whispered Amina, one of her former admirers. "How can you say that?" But Jama had retreated into the fortress of her ego, the same arrogance that had always protected her from doubt and criticism. If she acknowledged that the supernatural was real, she'd have to accept responsibility for Na's death. Better to double down on her skepticism. While the professor arranged for transportation and the other students packed with trembling hands, Jama slipped away from the lodge. She'd noticed the path to the Black Lake during their arrival, a narrow trail that wound through acacia trees toward a distant shimmer of water. The lake lay in a natural depression, surrounded by fever trees whose white bark glowed like bones in the morning sun. The water was indeed black, not with pollution, but with a depth that seemed to swallow light itself. Strange mists coiled across its surface, forming shapes that almost looked like reaching hands. Jama kicked off her expensive boots and rolled up her designer jeans. Just water, she told herself. Nothing but superstitious nonsense. She waded in ankle-deep, then knee-deep. The water was surprisingly warm, almost body temperature, and it seemed to pulse with a rhythm like a slow heartbeat. Fish moved beneath the surface, or were they fish? The shapes were too large, too angular. Fascinating place, isn't it? Jama spun around to find a man standing on the shore. He was perhaps 30, with the kind of classical features that belonged in Renaissance paintings. His clothes were simple but well cut, and when he smiled, his teeth were perfect white. "I didn't hear you approach," Jama said, suddenly aware of how isolated she was. "Sound travels strangely here," he replied, wading into the water to join her. The lake has unusual acoustic properties, among other things. Something about his phrasing made her uneasy, but his presence was oddly comforting after the trauma of the previous night. "Are you from the village?" in a manner of speaking. His hand brushed hers beneath the water, and she felt an electric thrill. "You're very brave coming here alone. Most visitors heed the warnings." "I don't believe in warnings," Jama said, moving deeper into the lake. The water reached her waist now, then her chest. "I believe in evidence and logic." The man's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed sharper than they had moments before. "How wonderfully modern of you. Tell me, what evidence would convince you that some warnings should be heeded?" Before Jama could answer, she felt something wrap around her ankle, something smooth and strong like a tentacle. She tried to pull free, but the grip tightened, dragging her toward the center of the lake. "Help! Me!" she gasped. But when she looked for the handsome stranger, she saw only an ancient woman with clouded eyes and skin like waterlogged leather. The creature's mouth opened in a grin that revealed rows of needle-sharp teeth. "You wanted evidence," the thing croaked in a voice like drowning children. "Here is your evidence." The lake pulled Jama under, and the last thing she saw was the surface closing over her head like a black mirror, reflecting her terrified face back at her as she sank into the hungry depths. Jama woke to the sound of weeping. She lay on cold stone in absolute darkness, her clothes still damp from the lake. Every muscle in her body ached as if she'd been tumbled in a washing machine, and her throat burned with the memory of swallowed water. But she was alive. Somehow, impossibly alive. "Hello?" she called out, her voice echoing strangely in the enclosed space. New arrival. Came a bitter laugh from somewhere to her left. "How wonderful! Another fool who thought they knew better." As Jama's eyes adjusted to the darkness, she began to make out shapes, human figures huddled against the cave walls. There were perhaps 20 of them, ranging from children to elderly adults, all wearing the tattered remains of clothing from different eras. "Where are we?" Jama asked, struggling to sit up. "The lake's belly," replied an elderly man with a British accent. "I've been here since 1987, though time moves strangely in this place. Days feel like hours, but seasons pass like minutes outside." A younger woman with intricate braids spoke up. "I came here in 2003. Thought I was brave, like you. Thought the old stories were just that, stories. Jama crawled toward the voices, her hands scraping against rough stone. The cave seemed vast, with passages branching off in all directions, like the inside of a termite mound. Strange, phosphorescent. Moss provided just enough light to see the despair etched on her fellow prisoners' faces. "How do we get out?" she demanded. The bitter laughter came again. "Get out? Oh, that's rich. Do you see those bones in the corner? Those belonged to people who thought they could get out." Jama's eyes followed his pointing finger to a pile of yellowed human remains. Her stomach lurched, but she forced herself to think logically. There has to be a way. Everything has a solution if you approach it scientifically. Science? The British man shook his head. "I was a professor of geology at Cambridge. Fat lot of good it did me here." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of shuffling footsteps. The old woman from the lake appeared at the mouth of the nearest tunnel, dragging a sack behind her. Her appearance shifted constantly. Sometimes she looked like a beautiful young woman, sometimes like a withered crone, sometimes like something that had never been human at all. "Feeding time, my darlings," she crooned, dumping the contents of her sack onto the cave floor. Rotting fruit, moldy bread, and chunks of meat that might once have been fish spilled across the stone. The smell was overwhelming. "Eat up," the creature commanded. "You'll need your strength for the ceremony." "What ceremony?" Jama asked, but the thing was already shuffling away, humming a tuneless song that seemed to echo from the walls themselves. The other prisoners fell upon the rotten food with desperate hunger, but Jama couldn't bring herself to join them. Instead, she explored the cave system, mapping the passages in her mind. The tunnels seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them, but there was a pattern, she was sure of it. Over the following days, or weeks, time was impossible to track. Jama noticed that the cave's layout changed according to some internal logic. Passages that led to dead ends in the morning might connect to new chambers by evening. The phosphorescent moss grew brighter during certain periods, dimmer during others, following a cycle that reminded her of tides. "It's alive," she whispered to herself one day, pressing her ear to the cave wall. Yes, there it was, a slow, rhythmic pulsing like a massive heartbeat. The whole cave system is alive. She began to track the changes, using small stones to mark passages and scratching tallies on the walls. The other prisoners thought she was going mad, but Jama was beginning to understand the creature's prison. The old woman visited regularly, sometimes bringing food, sometimes just to whisper disturbing promises about an approaching harvest when the stars aligned properly. She seemed to feed on their despair as much as their physical presence, growing more solid and terrible with each passing day. "Soon, my pretties," she would cackle. "Soon you'll join the others who thought they were too clever for the old ways. Your bones will make such lovely decorations." But Jama was listening, learning, planning. The cave breathed, and if it breathed, it had to have openings to the outside world. She just had to time her escape with the creature's respiratory cycle and convince the others to follow her. The question was, would her pride allow her to admit she needed help, or would her arrogance doom them all?